the possible link between UFOs and megalithic sites is that both are subjects which are slowly starting to open up now, but were always taboo for the general public to know anything about, as if there was consciously a cover up of this ancient knowledge. Yeah, the past is coming back to teach us that the future can be much more fascinating than what we're predicting it will be.
Welcome back to Cosmic Consciousness. My name is Jonas, and today it is my absolute honor, my privilege to be here with Brien Foerster, who is an author, a YouTuber, and a leading expert on ancient megalithic sites in South America and around the world. And his research presents some fascinating and extremely compelling evidence for lost ancient civilizations. Brien, I just want to take a moment to appreciate you and your work. Thank you so much for how generously you share the knowledge. It really has made a huge impact in my life. And thank you for taking the time to be here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
So for anyone new to your work, can you share a little bit of some of the most compelling evidence that you see for lost ancient civilizations, for ancient high technology, as you call it, and what initially captured your attention about this topic?
Yeah, it was the first day that I was in Cusco, Peru, which is the capital of the Inca civilization. And I noticed some incredible megalithic stonework that I have a building background. And so I'm acquainted with working with wood and stone. And so when I saw the size of the stones being used and the incredible accuracy of the work, I asked my guide, who did this? And he said, the Inca. And I said, that's impossible because they were a Bronze Age level society. So that's what started my hands-on interest in the subject. And that caused me over the course of time to eventually move to Peru in order to continue to pursue this.
Peru is really one of the global hotspots of all these megalithic mysteries, right? And these incredible ancient sites. I think, looking back for myself, probably one of the first sites that really arrested my attention and I was like, whoa, there's something going on here was Sacsayhuaman. Just seeing the, enormous scale of these 200, 300 ton stone blocks that, are fitted in all these irregular shapes and fitted together absolutely perfectly. Can you discuss your impression of this site and speculate on how this is possible to construct in this way?
Well, the interesting thing is when the Spanish first arrived in Cusco, they asked the local people who built that because they were incredibly impressed with it. And they were told it was here when we got here. So the Inca showed up about 1,000 years ago from Lake Titicaca and built the city of Cusco. So nobody honestly knows who did the work. We simply know that it was an ancient civilization that obviously had advanced technology capable of cutting blocks or stones as big as at least 125 tons and being able to move them from the quarry, which is probably 3 miles away, to the present location and interlocking the blocks so that they have basically almost a perfect fit. Some of them have moved because of earthquake activity, but that's the Inca admitted that they didn't do the work, even though archaeologists insist that they did, though they can't explain how it was done. So that's one of the great mysteries. And Peru is one of the great centers for this incredible megalithic work that we see.
Looking at Sacsayhuaman, it really does look like they were able to soften these stones somehow. Were these geopolymers? Did they have some kind of technology for actually softening this stone? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, all the geologists I know who've looked at it say that it's natural stone, and they know where the quarry is. To do geopolymer is actually very complicated. You have to grind the stone up to the consistency of powdered flour and then be able to mix it. So So we know where the quarry is, but it appears that there was some kind of technology that was able to temporarily turn the stone into almost like a marshmallow consistency. So cut from the quarry, moved, and then set into place where it would reset itself into being a solid object, which it is today.
Do you have any sense? I mean, can you even guess like what a tool like that would look like to be able to soften stone temporarily?
Well, actually, Nassim Harriman, who's what is he? He's a scientist, and he's a physicist, and so he actually speculates that they were able to temporarily turn the stone into a form of plasma. That's his explanation, and that sounds very, very out of this world, but that was his explanation of the only way that it could have been done, that it was temporarily turned into into a softened state and then reconstituted itself once it was placed in the place where it was supposed to be.
One thing that I've noticed, and kind of like I've been following your work for a while now, Brian, and one of the things that I've kind of noticed about a lot of these ancient megalithic sites is that they seem to be astronomically aligned, right? And that's consistent in Peru and Cusco, in Egypt. Like the Great Pyramid is the most accurately aligned structure that's ever been built by humans. I mean, this is mind-boggling stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, why do you think that was significant to these ancient builders? What does that tell us about them, or the purpose of these structures, that they were aligned to the stars?
Well, yeah, the Great Pyramid is aligned almost perfectly to north, south, east, and west. I think it's off by 2 degrees of arc. And that's common in almost every society, is that they understood how to align things to north, south, east, and west, taking into account the solstices and equinoxes for ceremonial purposes. The most interesting thing is that some of these places are actually off by 23.5 degrees. So Karnak, for example, in Egypt is that way, as well as the Ramesseum, and that might suggest that the axis of the Earth was different 12 or 13,000 years ago. So that's what I find intriguing, and we find that as well in some of the structures in Peru as well, but they're off by about 23 degrees.
Do you have any sense why it was so important to have these astronomical alignments?
Well, some would say it was simply for ceremonial purposes, but it's not that complicated to be able to figure out north, south, east, and west once you look at a yearly cycle, of the Earth and the sun and the moon. So it is kind of a mystery, though. I will say that.
Another site that is just like absolutely fascinating is Puma Punku and Tiwanaku in Bolivia. I know you visited this
Mm-hmm.
site many times, and it just seems so out of place. It's like there doesn't seem to be the thousands of years of continual gradual progress to get to that site. It's just like boom, there it is. Can you discuss that site a little bit, and just why it's so strange?
Well, it's very different as compared to the structures in Peru, which are more polygonal, or multiple-sided stones. Everything at Puma Punku and Tiwanaku is almost laser straight, laser flat. And the stone was brought from 2 different quarries. There's a red sandstone quarry that's about 8 miles away to the west, and then the gray andesite stone quarry is about 55 miles to the north. So, these stones, some of the sandstone weighs up to 100 tons, was transported over mountains, to this location. There's no other site on the planet that looks like Puma Punku and Tiwanaku, and they both are the same site. It's just they've been given 2 different names. And again, standard academics say that the Tiwanaku culture were the ones who built it, and they were barely Bronze Age. And we're talking, with the andesite, it's very hard stone. We see lots of drill holes and things like that that are all consistent with like what modern machinery would do. So it's one of my favorite places and one of the most enigmatic on the on the planet. It doesn't match anything else that I've ever seen anywhere. It's all by itself. But again, academia is still trying to say that this relatively primitive culture built it, which is completely impossible.
Would you guess that this predates the constructions of Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, and like other sites in Peru?
Well, I would say all of these places are likely pre-cataclysmic, so at least 13,000 years old. But beyond that, we can't really speculate how far back in time, but we do know there's a series of cataclysms that happened between 12,800 and 11,700 years ago that would have been absolutely catastrophic to any civilization living on the planet. And all of these sites we find have been physically damaged by some kind of enormous force. So that again is what's mysterious about them, as well as some of the surfaces are melted, vitrified, and that's another part of the mystery.
Yeah, I mean these like H blocks, these weird just these amazing stone blocks that have been cut in these perfectly flat ways are just mind-boggling to see. And I know your research has also found that some of these stones have phenomenal magnetic properties as well. Can you talk about the magnetic anomalies of some of these stones and what that finding might suggest about this site?
Yeah, well, I think it was ancient aliens that went there and first discovered the magnetic property. They took little rare earth magnets and all of a sudden, boom, only with the gray andesite stone. And so when I saw that was Giorgio Tsoukalos. The next time I went there, then I brought a compass with me and a magnetometer. And the magnetometer just goes, with some of the stones, the magnetometer just goes crazy. There's no pattern that I can find, but it's just that, and the compass in some cases, when you go into the notch in one of the H blocks, it will suddenly switch 270 degrees. And then when you pull it back, it goes back to normal again with the natural magnetic field. But yeah, it's the gray andesite blocks seem to be magnetized, but not in a particular pattern. Like when stone has magnetite in its makeup, that is while it's cooling, the magnetite will actually align together with the magnetic field of the Earth. So for this to have different patterns like that it is really inexplicable, and probably had something to do with the cutting and transporting process that was involved with the construction of Puma Punku.
Do you imagine that it has anything to do with like the functionality of the site as well, the purpose of the site? Because I mean, this is another pattern that we see at a lot of these ancient sites, that the builders are very particular about the types of stone that they're using, right? And where they're placing these different types of stone. Do those magnetic qualities, or I mean, the use of like specifically andesite in certain places, does that tell you anything about the actual function of this site?
Yeah, it seems to, because I've been there, I think about 60 times now. And every time I go, I learn a little bit more about it. And relatively recently, I noticed that it is almost like it's a small pyramidal kind of platform shape. The bottom four layers are the red sandstone, which is neutral to magnetism, but the top layer is the andesite, and it goes all the way around as a perimeter. So it's if it was made to set up some kind of magnetic field. Some say that was for helping seeds to grow, because it's a very harsh climate, but that could simply be a secondary attribute to it. The original function, I don't know, but it does appear to have had originally a magnetic field. So the energy inside the structure would be different from outside the structure.
Interesting. And I mean, it seems too like, I mean, just the tiniest layer has actually been excavated What do you think? Would you speculate that there's still a lot more to be discovered underground there at Puma Punku?
Oh yeah, my friend Antonio Portugal went there with a number of archaeologists, and they did ground penetrating radar, and they found at least one, if not two, large chambers, hollow chambers exist underneath Puma Punku. But of course, the government would not allow them to do any excavation. But then more recently, they flew a quadcopter over it with ground penetrating radar, and maybe even, yeah. And they discovered that the site is probably up to 10 times the size of what they originally thought. So a lot of it is obviously underground, and they've only excavated down about 2.5 feet. And when I've asked them, why don't you dig deeper? They simply say there's nothing there. But of course, they're covering up the reality that they don't want to know what's there. It doesn't fit their paradigm. So hopefully in the future, there'll be more excavating, but at least, going over and over and over again to a location like that gives you more and more information as to how it doesn't fit in with conventional archaeology or history.
Interesting. It's almost frustrating in a way. Like I feel this same sense at the Sphinx in Egypt. It's rumored to have this chamber underneath the front paw. These rumors of a hall of records or something like that. I've heard Dr. Robert Schoch speak about that. What is your sense? I mean, do you think that there's a hall of records underneath the Sphinx?
Well, actually, it was Robert Schoch who, again, he took ground penetrating radar, I think in the late 1990s, and they did discover that somewhere underneath the area of the front paws, there was a hollow area. But again, the government of Egypt wouldn't allow them to do any excavating of it. But there's actually a wooden platform in between the front paws. And when I asked our local guide expert what that was for, he said that's the access to the underground area of the Sphinx. The government put it there on purpose so that they could pull it up and be able to go down and access the hollow areas of the Sphinx. So we do know the Sphinx does have hollow areas. It's just the government doesn't want to admit that that's the case.
Going back and forth between Peru and Egypt, some of these ancient megalithic sites, there seem to be some linkages in the sense that, I mean, one of the most famous examples, I think, are these weird stone protrusions or these nubs that we see on a lot of the polygonal masonry in Peru. Also seem to appear at sites like the Osirian Temple in Egypt, as well as on Menkare's pyramid. Do you think that's like a legitimate link? Do you think that there was shared knowledge, shared technology there? Can you comment on some of the connections that you see between those two ancient cultures?
I think it was actually different cultures who did the work, because everything in Egypt is very linear, whereas in Peru, most of it's very organic looking. So it's a left brain approach versus a right brain approach. But yeah, you do find the knobs in both locations, as well as in India and I think Greece and other locations like that. So it's a great mystery as to what the function of the knobs was. Most of the archaeologists in Peru think that they were for assisting lifting the stones up into place. But then when some of the biggest ones don't have any knobs on them, they say, well, the Inca cut those off and polished them and left the other ones there. They never got around to cutting them off, which is completely illogical. So I think they had some kind of an energetic function. And other people have suggested that it's almost like that's how that the stone was extruded some way, and that the knobs were the little nubs left behind. So, and some of the ones in Peru are highly polished as compared to the other stone surfaces. So it looks like the manipulation of matter in some ways. Again, possibly making it temporarily soft.
It seems like there are some connections, at least some shared knowledge there. Because yeah, the mystery of these nubs, they are on many sites in India, in Greece as well. And then there's other things like at the unfinished obelisk in Aswan, there's all these strange like scoop marks. And in some places in Peru, there's also like at Sacsayhuaman, there also seems to be like similar, not exactly the same, but similar types of scoop marks going on. Can you comment on that?
Yeah. Well, it seems to be quite similar. The difference is that with the unfinished obelisk, the pattern is very regular. It's like some kind of machine was going along, because they're all about approximately 2 feet across. Whereas in Peru, it's almost like it was a hand tool that was going in different directions. So similar look, but different technologies involved in the actual work itself.
Interesting. So, Brien, I'm sure you've been asked this question many times and have spent some time thinking about it, but I'm curious to ask nonetheless, like, what happened to all these tools? Like this is when I share this idea with friends or this is like the most common criticism that I hear is like, there are no tools that are discovered that have these, highly advanced capabilities. So what happened to all these tools? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the tools were either recycled by different cultures over the course of time, like taken apart and used for different functions, or they're being hidden in warehouses in different countries that the government doesn't want the public to know about, or whoever did the work brought the technology, and then took the technology with them somewhere. So I think those are the three plausible possibilities.
Yeah. I mean, I actually think that there is some compelling evidence to kind of believe in this ancient alien possibility at the very least at some of these sites. I mean, apart from the fact that there is this massive UFO presence that's being increasingly acknowledged in by governments around the world, it's a really interesting time in the sort of history of ufology. But then also, I mean, going back into like ancient mythologies, like all around the world, right? We find these mythologies of indigenous people who speak of a time when there were sky beings here and present on Earth. I think I heard you mention in a video that some Incan people believe that they were descended from beings from the Pleiades or something like that. Is that correct?
It's supposedly part of the oral tradition. That's right. And in other cultures too, the Hawaiians talk about that too, that their ancestors came from the Pleiades. It's almost the Pleiades are almost a global phenomenon that way. There's also a tribe in Indonesia that make their houses almost to look like UFOs. And they say that they're descended from it's always talk about the seven sisters who came down, and then the six that went back, and one stayed and became the female ancestor of the particular group.
What are your thoughts on UFOs in the modern day? Are you following the news, like some of the stuff that's going on in the United States? I mean, there's this UFO report that's coming out in June, and all this movement in the government and Department of Defense, all these high level officials talking about how, yeah, UFOs are real. What's your perspective on all that?
Well, I've had a number of sightings myself, so of objects or lights or whatever that I couldn't explain, and you get like a hollow feeling in your solar plexus because your brain is trying to compartmentalize that experience, and it can't do it. And so other people say, well, did you take pictures? And it's like you can't take your eyes off of what you're looking at, so you don't think about where's my camera. You just, because you don't know how long the experience will last. Right. You just keep looking and looking until the experience ends, and then sit down, and start to ponder as to what it was you just experienced.
Where was that? Can I ask?
One was in Hawaii on the island of Maui, and all the others have been here on the coast of Peru. actually right from, I'm on the third floor of the house, and the ocean is right out that way. And so that's just looking out at night is where I've seen these things that I can't explain what they were based on conventional science.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Well, I mean, I kind of sense that there are some parallels in, the field of ufology, like studying these UFOs or UAPs, and studying these lost ancient civilizations. I think in some ways it kind of metaphorically represents a similar type of opening our minds to a greater reality. And I do believe that there are some probable connections between these two seemingly disparate topics. My sense is that UFOs or UAP, whatever they are, they've been around Earth since before humanity. And, from that perspective, it's not unlikely. In fact, it seems almost probable that they're linked to some of these mysterious ancient sites somehow. Going back to Egypt, everyone knows about like the pyramids and the Sphinx, but so many of these mysteries are underground.
Oh yeah.
One in particular, like the Serapeum of Saqqara. Brien, your videos on this site are just amazing. Can you describe to the audience what we find at this site and why it's so exceptional?
Yeah, well, it's as you said, it's Saqqara, which is one of the largest archaeological sites in the world. Most of it is completely off limits to common, normal people, but it's a subterranean complex, and you go down a staircase, and then through a door, and then you walk down this short tunnel, and then there's this very long tunnel that goes on for several hundred feet in the bedrock itself. And as you walk down through the tunnel on the left and right side, you see these niches that are cut into the bedrock containing these giant boxes, some of which weigh 100 tons, with the lid being 30 tons, the box being up to 70 tons. The box and the lid are almost always made of one single piece of stone. And it's pitch, without lights, it's pitch black in there. So how these things were maneuvered into the tunnel system is the great question. Again, academics say the dynastic people did this, but the stone came from Aswan, which is in southern Egypt. This is in the Giza Plateau area, so transported hundreds of miles. They say they were the burial place of ceremonial Apis bulls, but no bones of any bulls have ever been found. I think there are 25 of them, 23 are finished. 2 of them were left unfinished, and each one is in a different state of completion. Some of them are completely highly polished with hieroglyphics roughly carved into the surface. Other ones are there's one that's unfinished that's in the hallway in the next tunnel next to it, which is just the roughened out box itself. The lid is about 50 to 100 feet behind it. And so, it's a very complicated, incredibly enigmatic, mysterious place. It's what we see from being there a number of times is that obviously the boxes were roughed out, probably outside, and then brought into the tunnel, and then maneuvered into where the niche is. And then the lid would be put on top of it and then have to be taken off to do the final finishing work. But they would have been almost hermetically sealed, like they're that tightly fitting together that, how that was possible by the dynastic people is impossible. So it's one of the most enigmatic places that there is on the planet. Also in the Valley of the Kings, if you visit the big tunnel systems that go through there, that go on hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of feet again, at the end, you'll always find the remains of one of these giant boxes that look like it exploded or, something mysterious happened to them. And then, also now you can go under the step pyramid at Saqqara, which before was prohibited because they'd been reconstructing it for like 20 or 30 years. But now you can go down a staircase and then into the tunnel system there, which takes you right to the core of the step pyramid. And then you look down this shaft in the bedrock, and there's a massive multi-ton box located there as well. So as time goes on, they're opening up more and more of these mysterious sites in Egypt, which is really a welcome thing, you know. Whereas in other places, they're trying to close these places up, but Egypt is opening these places up, which is actually quite wonderful.
I remember like one of the first times I saw some of these stone boxes underground, like my mouth literally dropped because it's such an astonishing sight. The scale of these boxes, that they were moved hundreds of miles, finished to such an incredible polish, with these precisely flat walls and angles, only to be buried underground. For what purpose? You know, like I think it's safe to say that this wasn't for the burial of Apis bulls. What would you speculate are the function or purpose of these boxes?
Well, the interesting thing is that you're allowed inside one of them, the one that has the roughly carved hieroglyphics on the surface. And if you make the sound, the sound of Om, then the whole box starts to vibrate. It seems to be tuned to that sound. So obviously there's some kind of energetic function with them, whether they were for possibly regeneration, that maybe the builders would go into the boxes at night in order to have their body rebalanced by the energy of the earth vibrating through the box. That's what I think they were. They obviously weren't made as tombs for anybody, because they're way bigger than a human being. You know, the conventional way of a burial, like for King Tutankhamun, was he was put in a wooden box, which was put in a bigger wooden box and a bigger wooden box, and then a box that had gold leaf on the outside and stuff like that. So there's no evidence that there was ever anything inside the boxes in the Serapeum, unless there was, and whatever was in there was taken out and again hidden somewhere in some warehouse in Egypt or underneath the museum in Cairo.
We also find another one of these big stone boxes in the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid. Is this something different? Do you think like that box in there served a similar function as whatever these Serapeum boxes were?
No, it seems to have the same vibrational function, because when you lie down in the Great Pyramid and again make the Om sound, or somebody sticks their head into the box and then makes that sound, not only does the box vibrate, which you can feel, but also the energy is going straight through your body. So again, it seems to be some kind of regenerative properties.
Super.
And it too was found damaged. So what happened to it, I don't know. But that's the similarity, as well as the obelisks in Egypt too. They also have this resonance feeling. There's one that's broken at Karnak, and if you pound your fist on the side of it, it rings like a bell. So all these things were tuned for some reason.
Super interesting. Yeah, it definitely seems like at most of these ancient megalithic sites, that vibration, acoustics were really important for whatever reason. Can you talk about the effect of, or the relation between some of these sites and consciousness? I ask because I have heard that, for example, in the people going into the central chamber at the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid, experience, non-ordinary states of consciousness. Do you think there is some relationship there?
Yeah, well, also what's important is that the whole interior of the King's Chamber is lined in granite, whereas the Queen's Chamber is all limestone. So the Queen's Chamber has a very dead feeling to it. But if a bunch of people are chanting or singing or whatever in the King's Chamber, the amplification of the sound it's almost deafening. So obviously there's some kind of acoustic resonant original function as to why the builders decided to line that chamber with granite from Aswan as well.
I've noticed that they're also, I mean, these like mysterious megalithic stone boxes, I've seen a number of them in different sites around the world as well. In Japan, there's some really strange megalithic works in Japan, in Turkey, supposedly in Angkor Wat in Cambodia. There did used to be a megalithic stone box buried underneath the main chamber there. Yeah, I don't know. Do you see a connection there? Is that evidence again of shared knowledge or shared technology?
Well, maybe it's shared, or it's the fact that these different cultures realize the same properties of the same stone. So I haven't been to Angkor Wat, but I was in Turkey a couple of years ago, and even in the museum in Istanbul, the Antiquities Museum, they have these massive stone boxes that are actually sitting outside, and they're made of I think it's called royal porphyry, which is only found at one quarry in Egypt. So the stone was transported from Egypt or taken from Egypt. And again, it's a very hard granitic kind of stone that seems to have this resonance vibratory property. And these boxes also had strange heat scorch marks to them, as if maybe while they were initially being used, they energetically overloaded or something and cracked or blew up or something. Something again that standard academia doesn't even look at, because they don't seem to have an eye or don't want to look at the anomalous properties of this stuff. And of course, can't answer the simple question of how these things were made. They seem to be dodging these questions on purpose. And that goes in with what we were discussing earlier. The possible link between UFOs and megalithic sites is that both are subjects which are slowly starting to open up now, but were always taboo for the general public to know anything about, as if there was consciously a cover-up of this ancient knowledge. And that's why it's important to physically go to these locations if you can, to be able to see this for yourself. It's one thing to look at someone else's videos, which can be very insightful, but if you're there yourself, then you get to experience this stuff that can't be explained by simple logic.
Really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that I so much appreciate the work that you do, is that, I mean, you explore it in a very open-minded way, and yet at the same time, you're also very factually based and grounded in, science and reason, but you're not afraid to ask, real questions and legitimate questions about how are these sites possible. Just a couple more questions for you before we end here. I know you spent a lot of your work has been around these elongated skulls, the Paracas culture and people, and these elongated skulls that are found around the world. Can you share some thoughts on the significance of that research and what that might tell us about the history of Earth and humanity? Do you see these? I mean, were these elongated skull people the people who had high technology and were creating some of these megalithic sites, or?
Well, there are some depictions of that, especially in Egypt. You notice that Akhenaten, for example, and especially his children are depicted as having elongated heads. But the Paracas culture here this is where I live. I live in Paracas, and I'm actually looking at some elongated skulls right now. But they morphologically, they're different than a standard human being, which is very curious, and which is something that, again, academics shy away from. So they're completely missing the suture line that we have going back this way is completely missing in the elongated skulls, and their eye sockets are much larger vertically than normal, at least 50% larger than a normal human being. The foramen magnum, which is where your spinal column enters the bottom of your skull, is about an inch back from where it should be. So that's a genetic difference. And so, yeah, that it's an ongoing study that I'm doing with them. And genetically, we've been able to study the mitochondrial maternal DNA of 20 of them, and only 2 of them match Native American DNA. The other ones seem to be linked to the area of Eurasia, as if they migrated 3,000 years ago from that part of the world, because that's where the other largest elongated skulls in the world are found, especially around Crimea and the Black Sea. So it's an ongoing fascination of mine, completely ignored by standard scholars. But that's why I keep doing it, because I want to reveal the truth of this stuff to, the world in general, and not bother with having to debate academics who simply ignore the information.
Are there any discoveries that you would like to see happen in your lifetime?
Well, just more, getting more and more people on board to look at this stuff, more disciplines looking at it. In general, archaeology is kind of a closed discipline. They try to answer everything without bringing in other disciplines like geologists and stonemasons and in the case of the elongated skulls, medical doctors and people of that nature. And that's what I love to do, is to expose this stuff, especially in the field, to people of those different disciplines, because none of them can understand what the hell it is they're looking at. They just look, stonemasons look at this Sacsayhuaman and just go, that's impossible. Even in modern times with helicopters and cranes and power tools, they say that shouldn't be, that shouldn't be there. And then in Egypt, especially the tunnel systems, which again, we're getting more and more access to as time goes on. We actually get to go inside a site called the Osirion this coming October, which has always been off limits, built on purpose underground. I was able to be in there in March of last year for about half an hour by myself, just because of local connections. Before that, I would be allowed for like 30 seconds to go down the staircase and come back up. But this guy said, he guided me straight down. I said, can I take video? And he said, sure, go ahead. I just filmed away. It's a video I'm going to re-upload on my YouTube channel very soon. And so, yeah, it's all the underground stuff that was built on purpose underground that intrigues me the most in Egypt. I don't know if we'll discover much more in Peru. I don't think there's a megalithic site that is waiting for us, hiding in the jungle or anything. But Egypt's very, very incredible. Petra in Jordan and Baalbek in Lebanon are also just mind-blowingly massive sites that can't be, the guides try to explain, and you simply have to say, I don't believe you. And India is absolutely incredible. I haven't been yet, but there's, this stuff carved into the bedrock in India that just is mind-boggling. And
Kailasa Temple is just like one of the wonders of the world that, it's always captivated my fascination. How did they do this?
Yeah, and another place I wanted to go last March, March of 2020, which we couldn't go to because of the pandemic, was Israel. So that's still on my list, because there's a tunnel under the Western Wall that has at least one block that weighs 550 tons. And it's like, they say, well, it must have been Solomon, or it must have been King David. It's like, no, obviously Israel as well has a hidden history as well, which, I want to go and experience. Maybe some other locations, but that's on the top of my list because it's relatively accessible. Israel has an incredible history that we know of, but there's obviously stuff there that doesn't fit in even with the standard biblical history books or whatever. So there's still a lot of mystery. There's stuff underwater, which would be great to explore. In the Mediterranean and other locations. So yeah, there's still lots and lots of mystery to
One
We'll
spot
see.
that's recently captured my attention is Japan. There are these really strange megaliths. Like there's one called Masuda no Iwafune and another called
Hmm.
Ishi no Hoden. These like big rocks that are carved in these really bizarre shapes. And when I mean big, they're like, 800-ton rocks, like massive. And I thought of it because
Yeah,
underwater structures. And there's also this site called the Yonaguni Monument just off the coast
right.
of Japan. Have you been there
Hmm.
before? Are you familiar with those structures, and what are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with them. Again, they don't fit in with the standard history of Japan, just like these other places don't fit in with the standard history. Very enigmatic, obviously left over from uh, a time where advanced ancient technology existed. Um, in China, of course, there are sort of pyramidal structures which the government doesn't want anybody to go look at. They're literally planting trees on top of them.
Yeah.
There's probably also stuff in there's stuff in Saudi Arabia which is very similar looking to Petra in Jordan. It looks exactly the same. Made by the so-called Nabateans, who were Arabic nomadic people. That again, it doesn't make sense. So Saudi Arabia is open now to the public. So that would be another one that I might go to maybe after a trip to Egypt. I go to Egypt usually once a year, and so I like to go. If you travel that far, it's nice to hop over to another one of these ancient locations since you're more or less in the neighborhood. So yeah, Saudi Arabia is definitely on the list of places to go before or after an Egypt trip.
Brien, how has studying all these megalithic sites affected your own perspective on life, consciousness, spirituality, metaphysics?
Well, it's the simple answer to that is that history, the way we've been taught, is very limited to a time frame of maybe 6,000 years. That before that, everybody was a hunter gatherer or lived in very small collections of societies. But obviously, what happened was that there was at least one time period, if not more, where you had very advanced civilizations, in some way more advanced than what we have, who had an understanding of physics on a much higher level than what we have. And something happened to them, probably through a cataclysmic damage of some kind. And they disappeared, and then these places were reoccupied by cultures that we understand, like the dynastic Egyptians or the Inca, etc. But that's the fun thing is that through interviews like this and continuing to make videos, I'm able to get my word out to a larger and larger audience, and that there's much more of an interest, especially from younger generations such as yourself, interested in this stuff. And even the younger academics, I think, are starting to look at this and question what they've been taught, because they can see this stuff doesn't fit in with a standard picture. So I'm very hopeful that a lot more of this information will be getting out, and that much more will be exposed to the world as time goes on.
Brien, you've been extremely generous with your time. Just one last question for you. What do you envision of as the significance of this exploration? How can this knowledge affect or help humanity in the modern era?
Well, as we start to discover the properties of these ancient things, these ancient structures, it opens a window to be able to rediscover the ancient technologies that were involved in creating them in the first place. And that could be very useful in future generations in terms of being able to understand in a much bigger way the laws of physics and how resonance and sound function and things of that nature. So the past is coming back to teach us that the future can be much more fascinating than what we're predicting it will be.
I personally believe that this represents a massive step, like a potential quantum leap in the evolution of humanity as a species, collectively opening our minds to, you know, a bigger picture understanding of our place in the cosmos. Brien, thank you so very much again for joining me, for all for generously sharing your time. Can you just tell the audience any links to find you and your work at?
Sure. Well, my website is hiddenincatours.com, and 98% of the information there is free, with links to my YouTube channel and stuff like, you know, articles and interviews and stuff like that. So that's where you can find and books, etc. So that's where you can find out anything you want, more or less, of me. And I would welcome you, if you want to, maybe in 6 months, contact me again, and we can. I'll share with you what I've learned from my latest trips up in the highlands of Peru and Bolivia and in Egypt again.
I would love to. Thank you so very much again. I still have like so many questions for you, but we're gonna leave it at that. You've been such an amazing teacher to me, Brien. Thank you very much once again, and thanks for your time today. And I wish you all the best.
Okay, thank you very much, Jonas. Until next time.
Until next time, take care.
Okay, thank you.